Hey everyone, so I feel like all I've been doing recently is just cleaning off old Unimog stuff. So I just wanted to do something different, and I actually have a little issue with my Humvee. Now I know Humvees with issues, what a surprise, but it's not anything critical, it's just the fuel gauge is not reading right. So this should be a fairly simple fault tracing and fix, so let's get into that. So this is a Humvee M1038. Meaning that it's a cargo/troop carrier with a winch. It's from 1989, so it's an early production vehicle, and it has the 6.2 liter engine with the 3-speed gearbox. So this is about as basic of a Humvee as you can get, but what we're going to go over here will pretty much apply to all Humvees. So apparently the issue that I'm having is fairly common. That's why I figured I'd do this little video, because, you know, it might help out someone else. So the issue is that my fuel gauge never really gets below half a tank. And it doesn't get much higher than that either, even when I fill it up. And of course I noticed that this was an issue when one day I was suddenly parked on the side of the road, having run out of fuel, even though the gauge said that I still had half a tank left. This really is a very simple system and works just like many other older cars and boats and machinery. And that means the gauge itself really only has 3 connections. It has ground, which in this case is just through the housing itself. Then it has a positive wire that comes on with the ignition, and it has 1 wire that is running back to the sending unit in the tank. Now since the gauge does come on with the ignition, that already tells me that it does have positive and it does have ground. Now it could still be a problem with the gauge itself, but I can actually do a quick test of that and the 3rd wire back at the sending unit in the tank. So let's go there. Okay, so not all Humvees have this inspection hole right here. You can tell this one has actually been cut out at some point, but this is an early series truck. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the newer trucks do actually have this inspection hole here from the factory, because, well, this is a plate that I made myself, but there is actually an official part that is meant to go over and cover this hole. But I have just run into a completely different problem. The 2 wires coming off the sender unit here, there's a couple of connectors in the end of those right in here, but they're actually pinched in between the body and the tank down there. So it looks like I'm gonna have to drop the tank, at least a little bit. So I'm hoping that it's gonna be enough to just loosen these bands right here and just have it drop down a few centimeters or an inch or so. Alright, well that was enough that I can actually pull the wires out and get to the connectors. But I can only pull it out to about here, because one of these wires is actually connected to this plate a little further back here. Now this is enough that I can actually work with it, but it's going to be a little more difficult to see on camera what I'm actually doing. But I'm just going to be disconnecting these 2 for now. So now that it is disconnected, there should be an unlimited high resistance in that wire. So when I put the ignition on, the gauge should go all the way to max. And even further. So that part works. Now we can just see if it'll go the other way as well by grounding out the wire running to the gauge. I just got a piece of wire that I'm just going to shove into this connector down here. I just left the ignition on because I can actually see the gauge from the window back here. So when I take my wire and just touch it to some ground, we should see that gauge in there move all the way to empty. And it did. Just taking the wire off again, and it went back to full. So that tells me that the wires to and from the gauge and the gauge itself should be alright. So it's most likely the sending unit here that's causing the problem. Now it could also be the wiring from this to ground, but let's just get this out and take a closer look. Well, it doesn't look pretty, I can tell you that much. It does look like it was sitting for a while with half a tank of fuel, so that makes sense if it gets stuck up around there. Now, I already suspected this was going to be the problem, so I already got a new one. With the new one, you can hear the float in there. And the old one, nothing. So that float is definitely stuck in there. So there's a few things to be aware of with these sending units. Now, there was an old type that was in these early trucks. That was more of a traditional sending unit with a little arm with a float on it, but apparently they were known to have issues, so all the trucks were retrofitted with this style of sending unit. But there are several versions of this, and some of them are 12 volt, and they are for the civilian H1s. So if you have a Humvee, you would obviously have to get the 24 volt version. So that's something to look out for. Here is the parts number for the Humvee one. I'm just going to go ahead and get that one in there. It did come with a new gasket and mounting bolts. Holes are not equally spaced, so this little notch in the gasket has to go on this side where the wires are. And of course the wires are just pointing out towards the passenger side, just like before. Now the two wires on this, they don't have any markings on them. That's because all this does is just create a resistance that changes depending on how high that float sits. But that resistance is going to be the same no matter which way the current flows. So it really doesn't matter which way it's hooked up. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get it back onto these. There. And the other. Alright, well, I was just underneath and I noticed that, of course, the tank is actually just about half full right now, so we may not even see much of a change right away. No, it's almost exactly half full. Alright, well, I know that's not going to be enough for you, so let's go and fill it up. I deliberately went for this one because they have a high-speed function on the diesel pump, and they mark that as being for cargo trucks and Hummers. I think it's pretty funny they did that, even though it's an H3 and they were never diesel, but whatever. Right, so let's see if it shows us a full tank now. Yep. Alright, so I'm gonna say that this was a success. So that's gonna be it for this video, so thanks for watching and we'll see ya.